Hello everyone, welcome to the Fontcast. I am your host, Andrew, normally known for Beta 64, but now this is going to be my new career. I've decided to dedicate to my life to something I'm very passionate about, and that is fonts. It's not something that most people would say is one of their favorite things to talk about, but I have to say that fonts have to be the cornerstone of our lives, and I think they deserve a little respect. So on this show, we show great respect to our font brethren. Some fonts are better than others, I will admit. I have a very soft spot for the Shin Go fonts, and the Calibri is a very good font. And there are other fonts that I'm not as big of a fan on, and I thought we could touch on that a little bit today. So, as always, let's get fonting. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is Helvetica. Now, you might not know this, but Helvetica is a very common font that you will find basically everywhere. For instance, I went out today and went to a Walgreens, and the font that they used for the drive-thru was Helvetica. Across the street was a massage place that also used the font Helvetica. And that's not to mention the tag agency, which also used Helvetica as the font. I feel like Helvetica is one of those unsung, dare I say it, villains of the font universe. Now, I don't hate Helvetica at all. In fact, Helvetica is a very clean font. But the problem that I have is just how much it's been used. It almost falls into the Comic Sans category, where Comic Sans was a very, very popular font and eventually had a falling out that made people not very big fans of it. Now, Comic Sans, of course, is a much more distinct font, a font that you will definitely see as more of a nuisance than Helvetica. Helvetica is very subtle. Some might even look at a font, for instance, like on the Switch or the Wii, and be like, oh, this is Helvetica. It's not. Those are part of the Shin Go families of fonts. The Wii obviously using a different one than the Switch, but they are still within that same Shin Go family. Helvetica, it's kind of almost a hot take, I would say. It's hard to have a hot take on the Fontcast, because, fonts are just such a lesser known. I'm not going to come out here and tell you that fonts are this incredible topic, but, for instance, this is probably one of the only font casts out there. I'm just trying to fill a void where I see a void there to be. So, I am willing to go out on a limb and say that I'm not a big fan of Helvetica. I feel like there are better fonts that you could use that are similar to Helvetica but provide a more distinct look to it. And I think that's the point I'm trying to make here. It's not that I don't like Helvetica. It's more that I don't like how common it is. There are plenty of clean, sleek fonts that are like Helvetica that perform the same thing but still have that sense of originality, which is something that you want to see in a logo. There's just this trend of different businesses in the United States where you will just see a building with the Helvetica font and red colored text. It's almost as if it's the default one that the owner of a business strip might provide to the business owner when they move in. And that's the problem I have with it. It feels like no effort was put into it. I want to see effort in the font choice. That is where I find the beauty of fonts to be, as an artistic expression of the user. And I feel like Helvetica can't really provide that. For a better alternative, I highly recommend Calibri. Calibri is, I believe, to be one of the default fonts for a Mac operating system. I'm just pulling it up right now so I can see for myself. Just whenever I talk about a font, I like to look at it so that way I can really sense just like, because a visual memory I might have in my mind won't be the same as being able to see that font on the screen. So, yes, Calibri. I like the fact that it's a little bit more rounded than Helvetica. Helvetica has a very, very harsh look to it. It's still a clean font, yes. It's still a very, very clean font, but it's got those harsh edges. Let me pull up that real quick so that way I can see. Yeah, especially around like the E's. Like if you look at the letter E, it's like a square. It's got rectangular edges that are very harsh, with the A especially too, on the tip and on the sides. But with Calibri, if you look at, like, for instance, that A, you can see a little bit of rounding on the edges. Not much, but it's enough to give it a less harsh feel. I feel like Helvetica is almost, dare I say it, within the kind of same category as the impact font. Now, the impact font is, as it says, meant to be very impactful. It is sharp, it is loud, it is bold. But the thing about impact is it has its purpose. There are plenty of times that I've seen impact used in a very effective way. And I feel like Helvetica just takes what makes impact special, that impact, and just throws it away for a more generic looking font. Now, I know Helvetica kind of birthed these other simple fonts, so I do want to give credit where credit's due. It's not that Helvetica stole something, it's just more like Helvetica was a starting point that I feel like has become so commonplace that we need to kind of move away from. It's becoming kind of the rut of the font world. And I feel like the further we move away from using Helvetica and instead use some more distinct fonts with more originality to them, more uniqueness, I feel like the world will be a better place. Now, since we're on this subject of kind of giving our critique of different fonts, I do want to get this out of the way. Since this is the first episode of the Fontcast, I feel like we have to talk about the main subject that every Fontcast should talk about, the debate between Comic Sans and Papyrus. There is a raging debate in the font community about this. Comic Sans, of course you know about it. It was popularized by Microsoft, the creator, using it in various different programs such as 3D Movie Maker. And there have been fonts that have reached kind of the same level of Comic Sans, such as the ones used by Rare in the Banjo-Kazooie Xbox remaster, as well as different games from that era like Viva Pinata. Though that is not Comic Sans. It's just got that same kind of playful look to it. And that's really what Comic Sans is. It was designed as a playful font. And I think that's good. I legitimately don't hate Comic Sans. I know that it had a lot of use put on it. I would say probably around 20 years ago. Over 20 years ago at this point, there was a lot of use of Comic Sans, and it kept going until people started to get sick of it. In stark contrast to Papyrus. Now, Papyrus, I will say this, even though it's not as commonly used in the main, like, day-to-day life of the world, you don't see it very often in computer programs like Comic Sans was, it is still a highly used font in very specific aspects. There are specific times, for instance, if you want to show, like, some text on old crumpled up paper, like parchment paper or like a scroll. If you want to digitally put text on that, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be Papyrus. For instance, if you went to, let's say, like a church and saw a bulletin, if they're talking about the Bible in that bulletin, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be using Papyrus. If you see, for instance, an art exhibit about Egyptian art, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be using Papyrus. And that's why I'm going to say, this might not be as hot of a take as I might think it is, but that's why I say that Comic Sans is a much better font than Papyrus. Papyrus is a font that I just can't get behind. It doesn't seem visually pleasing. It's only used for one specific aspect, such as showing old text on old pieces of paper, or for instance, like an engraving on a wall. That's really the only use for it. Comic Sans can still be used in a variety of circumstances to add a playful nature to it. It's even still used today within meme culture. And that's why I say Comic Sans has a good purpose with meaning behind it. While Papyrus, on the other hand, it honestly feels like, once again, a rut. And I think that's the problem I'm having in the font world today. It seems like a lot of people are in a font rut. Something that we need to get out of. That's why I am very glad to see people utilizing a Helvetica-like font in a non-Helvetica standard. Something that's more unique, as I said. It's all about staying out of the font rut. And I feel like Comic Sans, while it was a font rut at the time, it is not a font rut now. Nowadays, it can be used ironically. And that's the special thing. There aren't a whole lot of fonts that you can use in that way. Now, will I bite my tongue and later on be ashamed that I said this because once again it became a rut in the font community? I don't know. I am basing this podcast on this point in time where the font community is using Comic Sans in a unique and special way, and that is what makes it good. Papyrus, on the other hand, I'm just not feeling it. I have to say it is not my favorite font. But I hate to bring us on such a low note, so I definitely want to make note of the Shin Go font. The Shin Go font is the one, as I said, alluded to at the beginning of this podcast. The Shin Go font is a font that was used on the Wii as well as on the Switch. Oh, I'm looking at it right now. The A-OTF Shin Go Pro font family. This is the font that was used on the Nintendo Wii, and it's just a fantastic font. Once again, I am loving the rounded edges. The problem is, for a font like Plumpful, that has a very rounded edge, and I really like that. But it can also be seen as too playful. It doesn't have that kind of sophistication around it. This, on the other hand, has just the right amount of rounding, with just the right amount of... I'm sorry, I'm getting a little choked up about this. It's just such a beautifully made font. And if we want to go even further with the font that's used on the Switch, it honestly feels like the font on the Switch, it kind of, dare I say, improved it. Yeah. This font is known as the A-OTF UD Shin Go NT Regular. It's a thinner font than you might say is on the Wii. The Wii can use it in a thicker way. But the thing is, it would be a big mistake to say they're the same font. They have their own unique properties that make them special. Now, if I had to choose between the one that was used on the Nintendo Wii and the one used on the Nintendo Switch, honestly, it's a hard pick for me. It feels as if the one on the Wii has a bit more of a playful style, while the one on the Switch is more sophisticated, but that could also just be my font nostalgia. I grew up looking at that Wii font and really soaking it in. And it was just such a beautiful font. And to see the next iteration of that in the Switch, it feels as if I grew with the font. Does that make sense? I feel like the font grew with me. And that's what's so special about it. It is just such a well-made font. You can almost sense the artist behind it. That's one thing that is hard to capture in a font. When you put a paintbrush to a canvas, you can feel the artist behind that, right? But when it comes to a font, it's a little bit harder to find that artist behind it. But with those Shin Go fonts, I can just see the person working on them. not just like throwing it together, but putting real effort into making it the best font they can make it. It is an incredibly special font to me personally, and I hope that you will consider looking at the font yourself. Well, I didn't want to keep this font cast too incredibly long because I have a lot of fonts to talk about. We didn't even get to Futura. Futura is a almost halfway point between that rounded font and the straighter, hard-edged font of Helvetica as well. Sorry, I'm going to start rambling. If I don't stop myself now, I could be talking for at least another 20 to 30 minutes about fonts. So I'm going to end the podcast here, but I just want to thank you so much for listening. And I hope I'll see you around for episode 2 of the Fontcast whenever that drops. Thank you again, and I hope you have a font-tascular day.